All right, so prompt 3, Paradise Lost. So this will be due Monday the 10th. So Monday a week from now, the 10th. I need to check the final exam calendar. I'm not sure which day our class is on yet. It'll probably be on that Monday too. She'll probably be doing both. If I had to guess, she's probably going to be doing both same day, thereabouts. So we'll go ahead and get a start on this now. That way you don't have to worry about it before the exam. Good news is, as I said, when we do the exam, you guys will not have an essay component to it. It'll just be multiple choice questions and short answers. So no essay component to the exam this time, since I'm making you finish up your third paper. So a quick announcement too, by the way, I should be getting you your poems back today. I've only got a couple more left to do. Good news is they're turning out really well. Everybody class-wide has been doing pretty good with them. So yeah, I think you guys actually got the meter and rhyme and all that stuff down for the most part. So I've been very pleased with them, mostly A's on the poems so far. Yeah, so couldn't be more pleased. So as far as the normal formatting for this, 3 to 4 pages, double spaced, Times New Roman 12 font. This how to cite from Milton is a little different than citing from previous stuff. So whenever you cite from Milton, so let's say that you're quoting from book 6. So when you cite from Milton in the parentheses, you would put the book 6 in Roman numerals, and then dot, then the line number goes in Arabic numerals. So VI dot 405 to 08, or IX 200 to 204, right? Whatever you're citing from Milton, the book number goes first in Roman numerals, and then the line number goes in normal numbers, normal Arabic numbers. That's technically how you're supposed to quote from Shakespeare too. But as far as this goes, I figured I would have you guys do it this time. That way, especially if you say something in the paper and I need to look up the quote, I can go find it fairly easily. Last name, page number always goes in the top margins. All that good stuff. Proofread the paper for grammar errors and spelling errors. Always run the spell checker, right? It can never hurt. So your questions to pick from. In her first speech of the poem, Eve reminisces about her memory of her own creation. Why does Milton make her story resemble the story of Narcissus, which the poem's readers would see as an example of vanity? If she's naturally prideful, can she be expected to exercise moral free will? And what are we to make of the way in which a voice, the invisible God, interrupts Eve to take her to Adam, and of the way that Eve responds to Adam upon first seeing him? What is the point of this episode? What is Eve and or the reader supposed to learn about the way Eden works? So Nicole, I know Nicole, you're talking about doing something like this for me in 102 as well, so you could perhaps even double dip here if you wanted to answer this question. So what's Milton put Eve in this situation, right? To describe her as being naturally prideful. Does that set her up for failure? Does she have free will or not? This is a question that we discussed very heavily in class. Despite what Milton may have intended, does his version of Satan invite a sympathy for the devil, considering he could be read as a victim of God's predestination? How should we read Satan, since he degenerates from a near titan to possessing a serpent? Does Satan's fall mirror Adam's and Eve's fall in any way? Is reading Milton's Satan as sympathetic dangerous in any way, since Milton's epic voice often warns us about his persuasive rhetoric? This is the should you feel sympathy for the devil question or no? We all had our discussions about this in class, right? I remember Nicole was feeling sympathy. Dale wasn't much, right? So, yeah, I'll be interested to hear if you pick that question. As always, back it up with the text.
With that second question, would you suggest a black and white view of that, or how one sympathy can develop throughout the text?
Yeah, either way, it doesn't have to be black or white.
Okay.
Yeah, you could talk about how you feel your sympathy waning for him as the text progresses, perhaps. In book 1, he sounds pretty persuasive, right? But by book 9, he not so much. Compare and contrast Milton's representation of a particular phenomenon before and after the fall. You could consider, for example, the problem of knowledge, sexuality, or style of speech. What are the characteristics of Adam and Eve's altered style? So we talked about this some in class too, right? What's life like in Eden? What does life become like after the fall? What's life like pre-lapsarian? What's life like post-lapsarian? So to do this question, focus in on a specific thing, right? So you could talk about sexuality in Paradise Lost before and after the fall. You could talk about work before and after the fall. Any number of things here. But if you do that question, pick one thing. Don't do multiple things. Comment on Milton's God and the philosophical problem of predestination. Are any of the characters truly culpable if they are created with flaws? Should they be held as responsible for their actions despite it being preordained as God's plan? So this is a similar question to some of the previous ones, but this question gives you room to talk about all three characters instead of just one.
With that one, number 4, could nature and nurture be tied into that a little bit?
I don't see why not. How would you tie it in?
Well, the lack of a caring God's constructive guidance would really have stopped the fall from happening. And also, whenever Satan tricks Eve, that could be viewed as a really sort of backhanded nurturing that nurtures her in the wrong direction.
Right? Yeah, if you want to make that argument, go for it. That sounds good to me. Question 5. I'm guessing this is going to be the question a lot of you guys pick. I've given this question before when I've taught Paradise Lost, and it's usually a fun exercise. Why do you think Paradise Lost has never been made into a mini series or film? Could it ever work in that medium? Why or why not? To answer this question, you could tackle any number of themes that may or may not translate to modern audiences, as well as the practical and or economic nature of translating the story to film. Right, so do you think it could ever work in film or television in any way without perhaps offending the sensibilities of many people, how being extremely controversial, and various themes, or even just like how would you handle like the problem of nudity in Eden, for instance, or yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff you can go. There's lots of ways you can go with that question. So I
You'd have
mean,
to have an insane budget to do it proper justice too.
right? Yeah, it would take God knows how much to, because you would have to film scenes in hell. You would have to film scenes in heaven. You would have to create your own Eden. Right? That doesn't sound like a very cheap. Doesn't sound like a very cheap project. Who would
It
you
take a lot of.
cast? Here's a question for you guys. Who would you cast for some of these parts, like in our modern actors?
How about Nicolas Cage as God?
Honestly, I could see Morgan Freeman as being Satan. I know he's cast as God in a lot of roles, but I think he would be a very interesting Satan.
You can't beat Al Pacino's Satan.
Yeah, what was that movie called?
Devil's Advocate.
Yeah.
Then Robert De Niro in was it Godheart with Mickey Rourke? It's older.
Yeah, I know that the Allstate man plays God in the Lucifer show now. Are
Right,
you in good?
I seen that preview in the trailer. I think it was.
Are you in good hands? Right, that's the guy who That's the guy who plays God in the Lucifer show now. So
A question that I would have as far as like turning Paradise Lost into a series or a film is would they follow like the theoretical geological location of things, and would the characters reflect that? Like, we know, as far as research goes and as far as supposedly the garden would have been somewhere in the Middle East or around that area. So would the people reflect that, or would they cast white people as the actors?
that's a very good question.
That right there leads into the fact why it's hard to even do that show, because people would be offended regardless of your choice.
Yeah. My guess would be they would probably cast white Hollywood actors for the most part. That would be my guess if it ever did happen. There was rumors about that it was happening about 10 years ago, but the project never kind of got off the ground. It was in pre-production, but never fully got off the ground.
I think another thing with a film adaptation of this would be it might be so heavy on CGI that really it loses a lot of depth, I guess you could say. And the only thing you would focus on was CGI. If even the smallest portion of it was a mistake, it really could take away from the overall series or film. I know that's what a lot of people complained about in the Avatar movie that came out. I don't even know when it came out, but that's something that a lot of people complain about.
Yeah, if I could pick anybody to direct this, I would pick Zack Snyder. Just because I don't know if you guys watched the Justice League, his version of the Justice League, not the original version of the Justice League. But he makes constant references to Paradise Lost in those movies. I don't know if you guys go back and watch those movies, Batman versus Superman and Justice League. Makes tons of references to Paradise Lost. So he's already used to doing these superheroes being like gods type of thing. So I think he would be perfect for a director.
Direct and write, or just direct?
Probably just direct.
I'm sure he'd be involved in adapting it to a screenplay too.
Yeah, that's who I would pick if it ever, because I think he's a great director. Give him creative freedom to do what he wants. Don't. Well, part of the reasons why those first copies of Batman versus Superman and Justice League were stinky was because the studio got too involved.
People can say what they want to, but I honestly think Man of Steel is a good movie. I think it's a great movie, actually.
Oh yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think it's a great film.
I wasn't too fussed about Batman versus Superman. I appreciated it more after I seen the cut you're talking about, though.
Yeah, his version of Justice League's on HBO Max now. I don't know. Have you seen that yet, Dale?
Yeah, I watched it when the first day it came out.
Much better movie, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. 4 hours is a lot to take in, but still, yet, in the comfort of your home, very enjoyable. Yeah, I had a little get together party type deal for it. It was a good time.
Yeah, it was light and day. Light and day, much better.
Did you see? You excited for that zombie heist film with Dave Bautista?
Oh yeah, yeah. The Netflix one he's coming out with.
Yeah, it's that's Zack Snyder too. I'm sure you're aware.
I don't know if y'all are horror buffs or not, but have you seen there have been previews out for a new film in the Conjuring universe? I think it's called The Devil Made Me Do It, and they're taking a crime turn in the series.
Yeah, I've seen the trailer.
It looks interesting. I don't know how it's going to be when it comes out, though.
I haven't seen that yet.
I love the first one. Second one's okay. Them Annabelle ones, though, I like them, but I don't think they're great.
I really liked The Nun. I don't know. I watched that, I think, 3 or 4 times in theaters, and it never got old to me. I loved it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. All film's subjective.
Very true.
Nun is very atmospheric, I think. Like it does a good job of building atmosphere.
Yo, what's a Yahoo doing in that horse house?
I know, right?
I just realized that. That's cool.
Yeah, I just now got a computer where I could have virtual backgrounds. So now I'm going to just abuse it before every class.
Did you get it just for the virtual backgrounds, or was that just a plus?
It's just a plus. This new work computer I have allows it. The other day I was in faculty meetings all day, so I put up a Roman gladiator, or the Colosseum. That's what I put up the other day in the faculty meetings.
If this class wasn't being recorded, I would ask you who your admissions counselor was, Kara, but.
And that's Gulliver.
Yeah, that was quite the digression. It's my fault.
Hey, it's the end of the year. What the hell, right? We can digress a little. So
hey, I really appreciate this story though, so much. In fact, I'm gonna go back and I want to read the first 3 parts. I guess is that's how they're labeled. I think.
Yeah, this is Gulliver's Travels, written in the early 1700s by Dr. Jonathan Swift. Of course, we read The Lady's Dressing Room the other day. This is his famous novel. So this was the 18th century was the birthplace of the novel. So you guys probably have heard of another novel around this time called Robinson Crusoe, written by Daniel Defoe. That's also about a guy getting stranded on a desert island. This was the birth period. This was the period where the prose form finally took off. So the very last day of class, we're finally reading something written in prose and not poetry or drama. So if you do decide to take the second part of British Lit or take American Lit, most everything you read in there is probably prose fiction or poetry. A lot more prose, even if it's just like letters and stuff like that. It's still prose. Like this class is the very last thing we read is prose. But this is a wildly popular novel. It's very highly anthologized. This is the part we read for today's part 4. The first couple of parts, he goes to a place. One of the places he goes to is he goes to a land of giants in one part where he's almost like an ant. Then he goes to a place where like it's the complete opposite, where the other people he meets are like ants, and he's a giant. There's one, I forget what the third part is, and then we have this part.
The third part, from what I've read, is about they're so intellectual that everything else seems beneath them and trivial.
Yeah, you're right. They're so intellectual. Their heads are like in the clouds. They don't know how to apply any intellectual knowledge to practical matters. And then we have this part. This part's probably the most famous of all of them. With the, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name for the horses.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I was wondering what it was.
I think it's Whinnem. I might be wrong. But,
we just call them the horses, or is that not right?
Yeah, we'll just call them the horses, just for the sake of brevity here. Then of course the mankind's called the Yahoos. This, as I mentioned the other day, the 18th century was the age of reason. Right? This was a time period where philosophy especially was taken off. I can name you tons of famous 18th century philosophers. You had people like George Berkeley, John Locke, who, if you guys know John Locke, he helped pioneer even like the American Enlightenment. Was like the Declaration of Independence. I mean, a lot of that language comes from John Locke. Yeah, this was an age of science. You had people like Sir Isaac Newton living during this time period. Many others too. So this was the age of science. This was the age of reason. Reason and not emotion. Right, is the key to having a civilized society. And Gulliver's Travels satirizes that. This is a whole. This is a great example of satire writing. Right? Gulliver's Travels just completely satirizes that and makes it look ridiculous. Right? The fact that reason is what makes man, what makes man different from the beasts of the field.
What's really neat about this, though, is he's able to do that on both sides. He not only tears apart humans, but he does the horses too towards the end. You start to realize that, what makes us great is actually what makes them boring.
Yeah, the horses. So let's go into that. What do you guys make of Gulliver's Travels here, especially the horses? You said that they were boring. They seemed boring, Dale.
I was just going to let somebody else go. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just I like the journey, how it starts. Once he gets to that island there, he comes across the local inhabitants, and he thinks they're creatures, but come to find out they're actually humans. But yeah, and he thinks these horses, he can tell they're intelligent. It's really perplexing to him, and he thinks they're some type of witchcraft or sorcery or something. Then he realizes, come to find out, this is the roles have been reversed from where he's, what I mean? They actually live it. When he goes in their house that first time, he's like, man, this guy must be really quite wealthy and doing good for himself because he's got all these horse servants. But
he can't wrap his mind around that it's the horses that are the intelligent beings and not a man. Right. in a way, that's a satire on humanism, right? The idea that humans are the most important creatures in the universe, and then God's cosmos, right? We've talked about humanism as a Renaissance idea before. Now, this completely dehumanizes humans, right? Making the horses the more intelligent beings.
Once you get a look into their society, and then they break down the Yahoos, or how do you? It's hard for me not to say Yahoo.
Either way, I call them Yahoos.
Yahoos. Yeah, he ends up get like really enjoying their company, and really having this like disdain for the rest of he really enjoys their I guess they're he just ends up being like inspired by them, I guess, by just their nuanced way of living.
Yeah, so inspired to the point that by the time he gets home to England at the end, right, he can't even stand being around other people anymore.
Hey, this man, yeah, he goes and gets a horse and pretty much like tries to foster this relationship with it, talking to it.
Yeah. It's like that show from the 50s. What was it, Mr. Ed? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The talking horse.
Yeah, and then when he's telling them that back where he's from, their kind has been just bred into submission, basically. And they're not intelligent. They're used for there are workhorses. No pun intended. Like they're we use them to do the things we need to do. They've been beat into submission, through breeding and this, that, and the other. And yeah, it's neat to look at it that way.
Yeah, we have throughout this whole text the discourse on slavery, right? This is really the first time we've discussed slavery in any form in this class. But this was, of course, the time period where the triangle slave trade was happening, right? So you had Europe, you had Africa, and you had America. And it was just this, they called that the triangle slave trade, where they would get the slaves from Africa, of course, then transport them to Europe or America. The West End, he talks about Barbados here in one point. Barbados was an English colony that was known for its slavery. But we have here the fact that the humans are the actual slaves of the horses. Right? They're it's kind of hard. It's kind of easy to tell, right, that there's some type of like commentary on slavery going on here. Like the
Oh, absolutely.
Yahoos are always trying to rebel. The horses have to put them down.
Oh, hey, speaking on that, there's one part in there where the horses decide to what they're going to do about the Yahoos as a whole. And they talk about castrating the whole species. That way, when they die out, they're just done. Because I mean, they're just lawless, and it's wild.
Yeah, these horses appear to be wise and intelligent, but we almost see the extreme that this age of logic can go down, right? To the fact that we're just going to castrate a whole race of creatures and just genocide them pretty much. The horses are contemplating genocide here in their cold, rational way.
Yeah, this is really neat because it's ahead of its time. I I appreciate this very much. You could say that we're in. We could, I guess, it might always lead to that. You know, taking logic and reasoning to the utmost power, it could lead to disaster.
Yeah, I mean, think about even like 100 years or so after this. This is when the eugenics movement started, where like you tried to breed certain races together, or let's say you had someone with mental, like they would try to breed out certain characteristics. Like they would try to breed like people with who they thought would be a good match. This kind of thing they would sterilize the mentally ill or mentally incapable, right? So in a
That
way,
sounds like a very fascist idea.
right? Yeah, in a way, this text is almost predicting this later eugenics movement that would give. Of course, that's what Hitler did in Germany, right? They would, especially like they would sterilize people if they were deemed mentally ill or and whatnot. Yeah, genocidal horses. Right? At first, the society seems perfect and utopian in a way, but then you really start to see the ugliness deep down the further you go.
I
I
think
wouldn't
this,
I wouldn't say it devolves or regresses to a dystopian. I think it ends up just paralleling our world, that it's actually just the same, just in reverse.
I think this brings up, I know it was a question in our 102 class, but the dangers of having intellect and being intelligent without any of the morals that accompany being human, and the dangers that can come with that. Because if you don't see and if you don't feel the boundaries that are placed on us by our morals and by our consciousness, you can do horrible things and feel that it's completely justified for the research and for the knowledge that it brings.
Right? So, are you kind of relating this to Frankenstein in a way?
I swear, I was
Yeah,
about
a
to say, it
bit.
sounds like the stereotype of a mad doctor or a mad scientist.
Right? The sake of knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? And how that can sometimes lead to detriment. You know, the mad 19th century scientist motif that we studied, even in like the birthmark or Rappaccini's daughter, right? Those are similar stories there too.
But in this case, it brings it to a to the view of a whole community instead of just one individual.
What do you guys think of the choice of horses as the animal of intelligence and grace and reasoning? What do you guys make of this choice of the horse?
I thought it was very interesting. Y'all probably don't know this about me, but I love horses. My dream is to own like 30 or 40 horses one day on a very large property. But I thought it was really interesting because horses are already viewed as the creature that embodies elegance and embodies beauty, kind of in the animal world, I guess you could say. And removing that aspect of servitude that horses usually play in a human's role, especially at that time. I don't know exactly what the message behind that was, but I know there was a message in it somehow. Because in the 1700s, horses were the biggest mode of transportation across the entire world.
Yeah, I think you just hit it directly on the head. That's exactly why they picked horses, or why
I
he did, in my opinion. Nicole, are you do you like horses, or are you an equestrian?
I'm not quite an equestrian. I know a whole lot about them. I've researched a lot and I've taken lessons for like 3 years in the past, but I wouldn't go as far as to call myself an equestrian. And I think that in the equestrian community itself, there are a lot of problems around like classism and things like that, as well as ableism.
Hey, I respect horses. I love them, but I don't have the courage to try to ride one.
It can be really scary if you don't know how to read their body language and things like that. They're an animal that requires a lot of observation to safely interact with.
I'm right there with you, Dale. I love them, but I don't know if I ever would have the guts to ride one, even just to walk in a circle.
Yeah,
The
right.
scariest experience I've ever had with one. I would spend like 3 days a week at the barn that I rode at, grooming at like every horse in the barn for like 5 hours. And they got a rescue in, and it had been seriously neglected and mistreated. And, I didn't think anything of it. I thought that, I'm good with horses. I can do whatever. I got way ahead of myself. And I went in the stall with this animal, and I saw like, the nervousness. Its ears were pinned. It had a swishing tail. Whites of its eyes were showing and its eyes were rolling. And this horse tried to kill me. I mean, tried to run over me, kick me, bite me. And they can literally bite fingers off if they really want to. And it terrified me, but I had to get over it and work through it.
But yeah, back to this story when it came out, it would have predated automobiles, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, this is 1700s.
Right, and so doing so, the horse is a great representation of that's the horses were used for everything during that time period. They was basically just I mean, we used them for everything. So to turn around and turn it on its head and put us as the on the receiving end is fitting, and it makes for a good story.
I feel like it kind of showed the relationship between horses and humans at the time because of their like how much they used horses. I think that people developed more of a relationship with their horse than most people probably, especially considering that horses like need to gain your trust before, they allow you to ride them or, use them or whatever.
I 100% agree. And I think there are some themes, maybe not super direct and out in your face, but there are some themes when you analyze this of animal rights in a way, because turning it around and having the horses like almost committing genocide pretty much says a lot about humans' relationships with animals and the harm that we can cause if you remove all ideas of oh goodness, I'm trying to think of the word. Like if you don't view them as sentient beings, they're not sentient on our level, but they do feel emotions and pain. And humans throughout history, we have killed off and eliminated so many species. And I think this really was a little bit of an animal rights theme to it.
Hey, one thing I'd like to add real quick though is talking about the horses, contemplating genocide. It needs to be added too though, but he makes it very clear that these horses don't have any sentiment towards any type of malice, or he describes them as they're benevolent. They don't even have a word in their language for I guess evil. So they're doing all this strictly out of what they is reasonable, and logic, like we was discussing.
Yeah, they don't have a word for telling a lie, right? It's that which is not. That's their word for lie. And there others, as far as evil, they equate that with Yahoos, right? So like they add Yahoo on with some other type of concept. Right. So Yahoo is what they pin all of their evil on, their ideas of evil on, or
But another thing interesting too is they do everything out of the sake for the rest of their species. Even their shoot, teaching their young when they're born, mating ritual. There's something about how they don't choose their mates how humans do, putting emphasis on what we deem important. To them, it's all about the species or race or how as a whole.
Yeah, very much sort of planned unions and whatnot. What do you guys think of how the horses are actually able to like operate? Like they don't. If you think, our hands are single-handedly why hands and our brains, right? That's why man became the dominant animal on Earth, right? We have an extreme advantage having hands, where we can make tools and whatnot. What do you guys make of the horses? Obviously don't have hands, but they somehow make it work, right? He actually describes it like the part of their hoof they use to do things like hands and whatnot. I thought that was interesting. He actually tries to explain how horses can do all this stuff without the use of hands.
Something that works well in a novel, but I think it'd be silly in anything else.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to make that look to get the same feel as realism as he's trying to get here, even though it's a satire. It'd be hard to do that.
They actually did make a movie of this. I know when I took this a class similar to this back in the day, we watched a film version of this. So there is a movie of this somewhere.
Do you remember it being any good?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I remember we watched a version of it in class with the horses. They made it work.
I'm gonna have to check that out just to see.
Yeah, it's a fun exercise imagining them doing all this stuff. What about the Yahoos here? Our narrator's first encounter with them is like he clubs one, right? And then he tries to like get in a tree to get away from them. And another one gets up in the tree and literally shits on him. All right, that's his first interaction with a Yahoo here. He paints us as being like extremely disgusting. Right? We're the most loathsome, disgusting creatures on the planet. No, everything these Yahoos do is loathsome and disgusting. Right? Even the way they look. He actually says that their faces look different because, like, when they're infants, the infants are treated more harshly. So that's why their facial features and stuff seem more disfigured. What did you guys make of these characterizations of the Yahoos? Even if we want to think about that as mankind in total, right? As we're all disgusting, vile, stinky, smelly creatures.
I think when you remove all of humanity's desire and ideation to put ourselves above other animals, it really takes that away and it puts us on the same level as them. It reminds us at our core, we are animals. You take away this intelligence, you take away our reasoning, we're still animals at the end of the day. But also, I think the Yahoos, I think they, really embodied like the eugenics theme in this, as far as being physically disfigured and looking different, it really made me think of the way that humanity, especially back then, would have viewed people with Down syndrome, with autism, with any kind of mental disability that changes their interactions with the world and the way they present themselves. And I think that that's how people really viewed them in that time. They viewed them as disgusting, which is incredibly heartbreaking.
Or you could look at this as this is what mankind was in its infancy. This is back before we was civilized. This is how I think how a lot of this would have actually looked, predating before we had any type of understanding of things, when we were literally just trying to survive.
Seems like remember 2001: A Space Odyssey, Nicole, the apes at the beginning. That's kind of what the Yahoos remind me of.
I can definitely see that. And I also see your point too, Dale.
Like the Cro-Magnon Neanderthal era of humans.
Right.
Yeah, despite all that, even when he goes home, right, he can't divorce thinking about other humans like they're the smelly, stinky yahoos that he encountered back on the island. He can't even be near his wife, right, without having to like cover his nose, right, because he smells yahoo on her, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's super cool. Never. I didn't like how they kicked him out. I wish they'd have just let him stay there. Of course, the rest of the story wouldn't happen, and that the rest of it's quite good, like his disdain for his own family.
Yeah, I was going to say too, to add to this conversation about disability and stuff. Race is probably also something that this text is hinting at. This was a time period. If you take American literature, we cover this a lot in that class. But a lot of writing that was going on around this time period was this type of like travel writing, especially in the Americas, where they would like describe the customs and the habits of Native Americans, for instance. Like they would paint them, they would go to great lengths to describe them. And then, since this is this age of reason, right, they would deduce from their facial features and their skin tone and all this stuff characteristics about them. So they tried to classify. This was an age of classification. They would oftentimes try to classify whole types of people according to their quote unquote scientific observations. So if you read even if you read something from like Thomas Jefferson, like if you read the notes on the state of Virginia, he does that, and that he describes Indians, and he describes especially the African Americans. He describes he notes on the state of Virginia is very hard to read. From
him and Washington, correct me if I'm wrong, they were both slave owners.
Oh yeah. Jefferson had bukus of children with the slaves too.
Think what you want about them and what they did for our country. That's just unacceptable.
That story that they love to tell us in middle and elementary school about George Washington having wooden teeth. I've done a little bit of research on that, and his teeth weren't wooden. He had, I don't know if it was from deceased slaves or if they actually ripped out living people's teeth, but his dentures were made out of African American people's teeth.
Either Washington or Jefferson one in their will left all their slaves to their wife.
Yeah, Jefferson didn't even free his mistress upon his death. He didn't even free her then, which was a dick move, to say the least.
But have you ever heard they try to give him a pass because that was I've heard the argument that was the time that they lived. Man, no.
If you look at Quakers in that time, I find the Quakers as a religious group really interesting because they never accepted slavery, and the majority of them, I can't say all, I know some probably did, but the majority of them, their ideas as a group were that people should be equal, all of them, Black people, Native American people, Chinese people, all people. And seeing that, it really removes the excuse of, oh, those were the times, that's just how things were. It's unacceptable and it's disgusting.
Yeah, but to get to the return to the point about ethnography, that's the term for this type of writing, by the way, ethnography. But like he would describe, Jefferson described Black people as being inferior because of different, they were, and superior in some ways. Like he talks about how they can work in the sun for so long because their skin's black. But he goes into great detail about how none of them can be good artists or poets because they lack that mood, that sensibility. But he talks about why they can make good music though. Like the whole text is just this description of like why, especially African Americans, are the way they are. That's the type of like racist writing about other races that are happening at this time.
What'd you say that type of writing's called?
Ethnography. That's spelled ETHNOGRAPHY. Ethnography.
I feel that
also, real quick, Nicole, before you go on, I was going to tell everybody too that Native Americans, one reason why they actually tried enslaving Native Americans, like they did the African Americans, but these ethnographers found out that they deduced that they lack certain characteristics that enable them to be docile slaves. Right. So you ever wonder why Native Americans really weren't enslaved in the Americas compared to African Americans? They owe that to ethnography writing. They say that they were too proud of people and all this stuff to ever be able to be slaves.
So we just decided we would try to murder as many of them as we can and then give the rest of them a small little piece of land and tell them they can govern it themselves and try to make up for this grave atrocity that we committed.
Pretty much.
I was gonna say, I feel like what you mentioned about how writers at that time would attribute African Americans' physical abilities as greater than white people's. I think that honestly is a bit of a precursor to the view of an individual's worth being how much they can do, the work they can do under capitalism. Like, I think that was a bit of a precursor to that, honestly.
Right. Well, the slave economy was the definition of capitalism. Right? Exploited labor, to say the least. Yeah, the Native Americans, when it was in the 1600s, when the American colonies were first established, you saw slaves of all varieties. You know, even in the indentured servants who'd come over from Europe, Europeans would be slaves. Like they were called indentured servants, though, because eventually they would be given their freedom. Only this is the time period, the early 1700s. This is the time period where slavery became associated with race. And before that, they had black slaves, of course, but it wasn't just black slaves. Early 1700s is when black slaves, especially, these were the only type of people who you could say could be good slaves.
I find it interesting that as far as American slavery is concerned, the majority of Americans at that time were Christian, some denomination of Christians. And when you look at Vikings, further back in history, when they were pagan, they were a big part of the European slave trade. They would travel to the Middle East, to other countries, and they would capture people and trade them into slavery. But when you saw the majority of the Vikings turning to Christianity, that's when they really stop participating in that. And it's interesting to see people who convert and who had to take a deeper interest in learning the theology and the tenets of that religion turn away from something like that, while people who were raised in it and who, you know, I guess in a sense, didn't have to search that far into it to find their belief, support that. I just think that's an interesting thing to look at.
Did I just hear you applaud and credit Christianity to some extent just now?
Yeah, Dale, I know it's against my better nature, but yeah.
Man, I was just made. I need to check my temperature. I thought I was sick.
No, I think I might be the one that's sick.
Yeah, we've had it. It's interesting that we're bringing Christianity up as we tend to do, because as you see in this text, there is no religion. Like these horses, I have no religion or anything like that too. So reason goes against faith, right? Faith, you can't have faith and be reasonable. Right. So that's perhaps why we have an absence of religion in this text.
Now, I could have looked over it, but like through my reading, I found it interesting that Gulliver, whenever he went back to his family and back to regular society, I found it interesting that that's something that he didn't have a lot of thoughts on, the religion that is really prevalent. I could have looked over that, or I could just not be remembering, but I don't think that's something that was brought up a lot.
I don't think it was either. I just read it right before class again. I don't think it was brought up. Sometimes the absence of something in a text is noteworthy, right? And a
Yeah,
lot of
but
the
you could say he's trying to represent human, like the whole entire race, and there's just so many different religions that it might have been that might have been a hodgepodge that was just too much.
I agree with you. I think that, you know, as Dr. Yeager said, the absence of something can be a statement. I think it may have been a statement on secularism. Maybe. If you want to look into it that far, I don't know if it's could be supported by text or anything, but I feel like that might be a way to view it.
So you think Swift is endorsing religion here just because secularism shows that it's so that it can be monstrous?
I'm not sure, because both of them can be monstrous when they're taken to extremes. You know, if you take secularism to an extreme, then any morals that accompany religions and religions today and at that time can be viewed as monstrous. But also, if you look at some of the justifications for war and for evil that are present in some religions when taken to extremes, that's also monstrous.
I take it back. We did have one reference to Christianity in this. If you remember when they described the horses, describe how the Yahoos first came into being, they were like, we saw these two Yahoos coming up over the hill, right? That was a reference to the end of Paradise Lost when Adam and Eve left Eden.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I guess with that reference, Swift's view on that could have been that whenever Adam and Eve were removed from paradise, they were set back in evolution.
Well, they really would have been, because I mean, if you look at the world and you don't look at it through this time period of how, you know, if you have faith in Christianity, let's say, you got to look at things a little bit differently than the whole evolutionary time cycle. But yeah, dude, they would have been really they'd have struggled hard.
Yeah, it's interesting that Adam and Eve would become Yahoos, right? That's kind of what Swift's going for here. Yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed this one. I think it's a nice way to end cap the class as far as that goes.
Now, you said this was the last day of actually, what the next few days are going to be review?
Yeah, Wednesday's class will be review, and then Monday or whatever. I'll check which day it is, but whichever day next week we'll do the exam. We'll do the exam the same way we did it last time. We'll all get on Zoom and you guys will take it on Blackboard. So we'll do the same type of thing we did last time.
Now, I thought the review last time was really good, but this time, I know we did focus on it a lot during the last review, but can we put like more emphasis on the historical context of the text that we've read? Because that's something I struggled with on the exam or on the midterm exam. I don't know if that's something anyone else struggled with, but I know I did.
Sure. Mostly we covered 17th and 18th centuries. So yeah, we'll go over again especially the English Civil War and all this type of stuff. Yeah, we'll definitely go over all that again.
I find myself getting so absorbed with the symbolism in the text that sometimes I tend to look over the historic things that kind of triggered that.
Yeah, we'll go over the class and all these different themes. I'll give you guys a comprehensive review, so no worries. Of course, it'll be recorded and all that too, so you'll be able to listen to it again before the actual test starts. So, without further ado, we will call it a day. Said we're done with the reading. Congrats, you got through the course. Besides taking the final test and the final paper 3, of course, but you guys have gotten through the course. So, there's lots of, this is a gigantic book. There's lots of other good stuff in here. Like, we only have so much time to read different things, but there's tons of good stuff in here. Keep this book after you're done with this class. Oftentimes you'll sell books back, but keep this one. You never know when you might return to it. You never know.
Yeah, I really appreciated this class. I got some much needed appreciation for the classics. All right, everybody, have a good one.
See y'all. I think I got more exposure to like